We're going to compare on an apples-to-apples basis buying a Toronto home versus investing the same amount in Canadian REITs and against a portfolio of Canadian residential REITs. We'll assume no taxes for simplicity. Let's talk some quick details first. For Toronto homes, according to Toronto listings, from April 2010 to 2020, the average Toronto home price went from $396,000 to $819,000. That's a 107% increase, but the median home price dropped by up to 10% during the month of May, so a more realistic market price is $737,000, meaning the price only increased by 86%. Maintenance is 0.5% and tax is 0.44% of the property value. Over a decade, the average Toronto home paid $55,500 in maintenance and property taxes. I assume you can rent out the home for $2,000 per month and raise the rent by 2% every year, but there might be some tenant issues, so you only collect for 9 months of the year. Over a decade, the average Toronto home could have generated $197,000 in rental income. When combining the house investment with all the maintenance and tax costs paid, as well as all the rental income generated over a decade, the end investment value was $879,000. That's a return on investment of 122%, which is an annualized growth of 8.3%. If you decide not to rent the home because you're planning to live in it yourself, then the end investment value becomes $682,000, which is an ROI of 72% and an annualized growth of 5.6%. Okay, so the real advantage of buying a home is by getting a mortgage from the bank. So with $396,000, you would use that as a down payment. For an investment property, it would be a 20% down payment, meaning you could borrow up to $1.6 million and thus invest with a combined total of $1.98 million. You would buy 5 Toronto homes, which after a decade, they would be worth around $4.1 million. You would pay around $277,000 in maintenance and taxes and collect around $985,000 in rental income. On the mortgage at a 6% rate over a decade, you would have paid $854,000 in interest and have an end loan balance of $1.21 million. So overall, your end investment value, combining everything together you made and paid, is around $2.7 million. On your original investment, that's a ROI of 592%, which is an annualized growth of 21.3%. If not renting, the end investment value would be $1.75 million, which is a ROI of 332% and an annualized growth of 16%. So here's a summary so far with how much you would have made on average investing in Toronto homes, showing the income and investment value, ROI, and annualized growth rate. Of the 4 investment options, the highest return is a rental home with a mortgage at 21.3% annualized growth, and the least was a house bought in cash at 5.6% growth. Let's talk about Canadian REITs. For those that don't know, REIT stands for Real Estate Investment Trust. It's essentially an investment fund that only invests in real estate and passes out a majority of its profits back to investors as dividends. So we'll use a 50-50 portfolio of the XRE and ZRE ETFs since they have at least a 10-year history. With the 2 ETFs, you get a good mix of Canada's largest commercial, residential, retail, office, industrial, and mixed-use properties. For a fair comparison, the dividends received will not be reinvested, just to be similar to rental income. I'll do a follow-up calculation after. If you had invested $396,000 like you would have initially with a Toronto home, you would receive around $264,000 in dividends, and the end portfolio value would be $503,000. That's our ROI of 27%, which is an annualized growth of 2.5%. It's not very impressive, but it makes sense since we're calculating from a stock market bottom for the real estate industry. But given the advantage of being able to reinvest the dividends by buying more stock, doing so would have generated $344,000 in dividends and an end portfolio value of $829,000. That's an ROI of 109% and an annualized growth of 7.7%. This is a prime example of how signing up for a dividend reinvestment plan can make all the difference in your portfolio's performance over time. In this case, we would have made $300,000 more. Here's an updated summary so far. Just from comparing an investment in a Toronto rental home using cash versus investing in Canadian REITs, the average home rental would have made more money, but it definitely comes at a higher risk given the possible tenant problems, vacancies, and property damages that could be more punishing than the average numbers I've used for calculations. So if you're willing to give up 0.5% annual growth to let dedicated property managers handle those headaches for you in an ETF, it's worth considering. Let's talk about the Canadian residential only REITs. Here are all the ones that you can invest in, but only these 4 have been around for at least 10 years, so we'll only use them. We'll do an equally weighted portfolio of these 4 residential REITs. If you had invested $396,000 like a Toronto home, you would receive around $350,000 in dividends and an end portfolio value that would be $1.15 million. That's an ROI of 189%. Which is an annualized growth of 11.1%. Again, given the advantage of reinvesting the dividends, doing so would have generated $452,000 in dividends and an end portfolio value of $1.77 million. That's an ROI of 346% and an annualized growth of 16%. So here's another updated summary with the residential-only REITs added at the bottom. With the Canadian housing market so hot, it only makes sense that the returns were so much better than the other real estate categories. When you dig a little bit deeper into this residential REIT portfolio, you'll notice that Cap REIT and InterRent were the two that drove all the performance over the last decade. So let's quickly learn about them and see how much you would have made investing in them only. Cap REIT is one of Canada's largest REITs, managing over 65,000 units across the country, the Netherlands, and Ireland. The profits of the real estate portfolio are divided like this. If you had invested $396,000 like a Toronto home, you would receive around $335,000 in dividends and an end portfolio value of $1.3 million. That's an ROI of 234% and an annualized growth of 12.7%. Again, given the advantage of reinvesting dividends, doing so would have generated $438,000 in dividends and an end portfolio value of almost $2.1 million. That's an ROI of 419% and an annualized growth of 17.7%. InterRent REIT manages over 9,000 suites across 15 cities in Ontario and Quebec. The profits of the real estate portfolio are divided like this. If you had invested $396,000, you would receive around $608,000 in dividends and an end portfolio value of $3.9 million. That's an ROI of 895%, which is an annualized growth of 25.6%. If you decided to reinvest the dividends, doing so would have generated $791,000 in dividends and an end portfolio value of $5.8 million. That's an ROI of 1,368% and an annualized growth of 30.5%. So here's a summary of every investment option we've talked about and some observations. The best investment this decade was InterRent with dividends reinvested, getting an annualized growth of 30.5%, and the worst was the Canadian REITs portfolio at 2.5%. Just doing a dividend reinvestment plan with REITs added 5% to annualized growth over the decade, which means adding 50% to ROI. Unfortunately, you can't do dividend reinvestments with rental properties because either you can't buy part of a house or most of the income goes to paying the mortgage or loan interest. If you simply bought a half and half portfolio of InterRent and Cap REIT on dividend reinvestment plans, you would do so much better than a rental property with a mortgage. If buying a home with a mortgage, you would have gotten similar returns to just investing in a Canadian residential REIT portfolio. In terms of income, you're going to get more take-home cash from investing in REITs than investing in homes, which means from homes, you're basically betting on the appreciation for your investment to work out. Again, with rental properties using a mortgage, all the rental income goes away due to the mortgage and mortgage interest payments. So whatever you decide to invest in, it's simply easier to put all your money in REITs because you have property managers doing all the work for you, from managing tenants, acquiring new homes, and borrowing from the bank. And if you need the money, you can sell your shares very quickly without using a real estate agent. But with a house, you have more variety in what you can invest in. You can make renovations to generate higher returns, and in case all things fail, you can still live in your own property. So that's all for now. If you learned something new or thought this video was insightful, remember to click the like button and subscribe to my channel. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on investing in real estate now that you've watched this video.